Okay. So my name is Alex Terrords. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for making the time to join us. We are here to talk about the new SCAR scientific research program, integrated science to support Antarctic and Southern Ocean conservation. This is a initiative, a scientific research program that has had quite a long genesis. A couple of years ago now, the idea formed amongst a small group of us, and Mecha Santos and I led a program planning group over the last couple of years, and we're very fortunate to have a very enthusiastic and knowledgeable program planning group from many countries, across many career stages and across many disciplines. And late last year, this SCAR approved this initiative, and we are now one of the 3 new SCAR scientific research programs. For those of you who aren't aware, the SCAR scientific research programs really are the flagship groups of SCAR. They serve to bring together reasonably large sections of the community under a common umbrella to try and deliver to common objectives with common goals. And in my experience, the impact of these groups can be substantial. So we're hoping we can follow in some big footsteps with Anticon. As I said, Mecha Santos and I led the program planning group, and we have continued as the chief officers of Anticon, and we lead the steering committee. Mecha Santos is going to start off with the introduction and overview today, and I'll come in about halfway through, and then we'll roll through the agenda. Something I did want to reiterate is that we have time for questions throughout the meeting. So after each presentation, we have plenty of time for question and answers, for comments. And this meeting is not just about us providing you with background and context and objectives and ideas that we have. This meeting is also about us hearing from you. And I'd really like you to engage. We had a fantastic meeting several hours ago. We had some great discussions across a range of topics. And I'd like to try and facilitate something similar in this meeting. So I'll stop talking. I'll ask Mecha to share her screen and start off, and then I'll come through halfway, and we'll roll on. Thank you. Thank you, Mecha.
Welcome everyone and everybody. You can see the screen, right? Yeah. So yes, I want to welcome you to this first meeting. As Alex mentioned, we are working together on this as chief officers, but most importantly, we are a group of very enthusiastic people and researchers working on this work, so this program. So I'm very glad and honored to be part of this, and I want to thank all my colleagues that will introduce the themes after us. So why the reasons of why we think about this program, and I want to highlight this. In this, I will say that Alex has been very proactive in this research program. But we all know that the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean are threatened by different stressors. We can see the changes, and we wanted to build a new program based on the foundation of the research programs that has been until now. We also wanted to address some questions that were raised by SCAR Horizon Scan. But fundamentally, we want that the research outputs will be used to inform contemporary and future decision making regarding the environmental management of Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. We wanted to make this link between science and policy in a way that is suitable for all the researchers. So it is something important is that the SCAR is implicitly considered, it is implicitly looking at SCAR for independent and objective scientific advice, and this was recognized in the resolution by the Antarctic Treaty. And we also know that the community, the scientific community, is eager or want to it has an increasing desire to participate or to provide science that could inform policymakers to make decisions to progress in the conservation of Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. So because of this, we want to have this approach that has a broad, it is covered by a broad number of people that could represent biogeographic diversity and also a gender equity. This is currently the steering committee, and you can see that we try to balance the gender equity and also to have a broad geographic representation. And also, besides this steering committee, we have some ex officio representative of different groups, as are mentioned there, which are the ATS, the HAS, ADEMS, and also Antklein now, Instant, Apex, ECBAM, ISET, ANTOS, and SUS. We want to have a broader vision of the work we can do. And then with this, we have this, we look for this gender balance and geographic representation. We are eager to include early career researchers and to provide opportunities to them, and to also to undertake leadership roles in order to experience what is this combination of this link between science and policy, and to train them in this approach. We are working, we have a transdisciplinary approach or vision with the biological, physical, earth, and social science and humanity. And this is, I think it is will be an important part of the work we are going to do in the future, not only to increase or to have these social science and humanities represented in the research. And we are involved and working to have a broad vision, and that's why we want to have a strong interaction with policymakers. So our broad objectives are to facilitate and coordinate this high quality transdisciplinary research program, and we want to improve the integration of this research outputs. We want to integrate it, and this integrated approach basically will facilitate to inform international policy responses and effective conservation and management. These are our broad objectives, and then now in the next presentation you will see a little more about the research team and the specific objectives that we have. Among them, I can describe that we want to increase awareness of contemporary and future environmental issues in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. We want to identify vulnerable species, ecosystems, and environments, and we want to quantify threats and inform the development of practical mitigation strategies. Which is important for us, what we need to be, which is our targets. The Antarctic Treaty Parties, the members of the Committee on Environmental Protection, and the Scientific Committee for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, as well as various international and national bodies. And in this sense, we want to provide science to inform responses, particularly to these emerging priorities issues, and we need to work with the policymakers to identify together which are, for all of us, the emerging priorities issues. Also, it is a process, an iterative process. We cannot do this only 1 year. It is something that gets better with time and with dialogue and with dialogue. And of course, we need to do this. We need to do this with close links to the CATS, and this is a key aspect of this program too. And I think I will leave here and leave it for Alex, that will continue. It's okay? Oh, it's here, sorry.
Bear with me, I'll just get my screen up, stand by. Great, I think you can see that okay. And just to follow on from Metch's excellent introduction, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points on this last slide. Our intention in Antarctica is to be agile and responsive enough to be able to talk to policymakers and change the direction of what we're doing in response to the needs and emerging issues and emerging priorities of policymakers. And I think that's a really important point here. The second point that I want to reiterate is, as we navigate this path to impact, interactions with the SCAR Standing Committee on the Antarctic Treaty System will be fundamental to our success, because that Standing Committee is the face of SCAR at these meetings. That committee coordinates all scientific advice that goes to the Antarctic Treaty System. So while we may engage with policymakers in various workshops and other settings like that, in terms of our formal engagement with those policy groups and those policy forums, SCATS will be, as usual, and as is appropriate, the face of SCAR. And so we plan to work really closely with SCATS. I think we've got some representatives from the Standing Committee that are joining us at this meeting today. But through my role in that group over the last several years, I really saw that there was a need to sort of bulk up, if you like, to sort of put some more flesh around the research that we were looking for in the provision of our advice, the SCAR's provision of advice. And as Metcha correctly pointed out, that advice is now held in very high regard in these policy forums. And I think what Anticon can now do is to build on that momentum and continue to provide research that underpins high quality scientific advice. So that's enough from me on that. Moving now to a little bit more detail about the Anticon program, we have 3 research themes and 1 synthetic theme. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, but really, I don't want to steal the thunder of the presenters that are about to come. So I'll go through these reasonably quickly. The first research theme regards current states and future projections. The second research theme is sustainability and impact of human activities. And the third research theme is socio-ecological approaches to conservation. These are not silos. These really are there to put some structure around the group. We need some sort of structure, and these are helpful to sort of define some broad areas, but they absolutely aren't silos. And as we go through the theme presentations, you'll actually see logical connections between the groups that we plan to build on and to foster throughout the life of the Anticon program. The synthetic theme is somewhat different. We want to try and have a theme that's dedicated to the integration of outputs, and I'll talk to that a little bit more in a few slides' time. So with regard to the current and future states, we are looking at things like, or we are interested in areas like vulnerable species, ecosystems and environments, integrated forecasts of change, projected impacts and key change drivers, and also importantly, cross-biome connections, and that's from the Antarctic right through to the sub-Antarctic. In terms of theme 2, sustainability and impact of human activities, we're interested, of course, in the current and future extent of human activities, quantifying these anthropogenic risks, looking at synergistic and cumulative impacts, and importantly, strategies for mitigating these impacts. Now, research theme 3 is slightly different in that for the first time in these research programs, we've actually tried to integrate the social sciences and the social science and humanities area, and we've called this socio-ecological approaches to Antarctic conservation. Now, Daniela will speak to this in the presentation on theme 3, but very briefly, we're looking across a number of key areas like connectivity and social impacts and consequences of environmental change, responsible and ethical governance of Antarctica in the 21st century, and the role of resilience in the dynamics of socio-ecological systems. I think importantly, what became very clear to me through the planning process and also through the broader recognition of the importance of incorporating socio-ecological approaches is that the social dimensions are actually inseparable from the bio, geo and physical components. And I absolutely think that effective Antarctic conservation requires an understanding of the interactions between humans and the Antarctic environment. More from Daniela on that in a few presentations' time. With regard to the synthetic theme, given our desire, our aspiration to impact and to inform decision-making and policy, we thought it would be really important to have a synthetic theme that started to bring some of these research outputs together. And I've just put a couple of examples on this slide that sort of highlight what this integration might inform. Things like systematic conservation planning, species assessments and protection, the identification of vulnerable ecosystems and the management of human activities. We also think that the synthesis group could provide input into decision-making frameworks, look at different management strategies, and also assess the sorts of vulnerability assessments that might be appropriate. And prioritisation is also something that's on the potential list of this group, as is quantifying and dealing with biases and uncertainties in decision-making. I'll stop there about the specific themes because we are going to have some more detailed presentations in a little while. But something I did want to reiterate is that we are very aware that some of this work is already being undertaken. And it is not our goal here, it's not our intention here to reinvent the wheel, as they say. Our intention is to find where these synergies exist, look for collaborations amongst the various groups, whether they be in SCAR or external to SCAR, and collaborate productively and in a synergistic way. In this way, what we're hoping is that Anticom can actually foster a situation where the sum is greater than the parts. And I've seen this happen before in other SCAR scientific research programs, and I think that Anticom really does provide an opportunity on this front. But it is important to acknowledge that there is already significant work being undertaken and planned in this space. And you'll see that as the theme presentations come through, you'll think, oh, I'm doing something like that, or I know somebody who's doing something like that. If you have that moment, hold that thought and get in contact with our theme leads, because we really want to talk to you and to look for collaborations. I think that's all I'll say on that front. So, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, Anticom was approved in late last year. Since that time, we've formed a steering committee, and Mecha showed that earlier on in this presentation. We've held 4 steering committees. We've got our mailing list in operation. We've got some social media sites registered. You can take note of those, and please, we'd love you to subscribe and join our mailing list. And I'll put these details up again at the end of the presentation. We've also held some theme meetings to identify some priority research areas and some activities, some preliminary ideas, if you like, and these will be a focus of the theme presentations. We're also providing and will continue to provide updates on the Anticom website, which is hosted on the SCAR homepage. Providing opportunities and capacity building is one of our key and most sort of fundamental aspirations. We think this is something that Anticom can foster and can do really well. To that end, we're going to hold training workshops. We're going to try and facilitate and fund fellowships to help provide access to learning opportunities, not just across scientific areas and disciplines and scientific sort of learnings, but also around how science can be translated into policy. And we're going to work with SCAR to see if we can't even get some fellowships up and running whereby people can actually participate in some of these international meetings and get a really good first-hand look as to what happens there. And I know from my personal perspective, actually attending these meetings as a scientist and seeing how my science or how other science is used or not used, as the case may be, really helped me to understand how to formulate and how to frame the science that I wanted to have impact. And I think this is something that we're very keen to facilitate through Anticom. We also plan to form a program advisory group. Now, we have a core steering committee, and we'll have a bunch of ex officio members also on that steering committee, and that will form a good group of engagement. But what we'd like to do is have a bigger group, a group that sort of builds on the program planning group that was so instrumental in forming the proposal that led to the success of the Anticom initiative. and also then expand out to others who are interested in playing a more active role in Anticon. This will be a large group. This will be sort of in the vicinity of 50 to 60, perhaps even a few more people. And it will allow those who have a strong interest in Anticon and decision-making in Anticon, and who want to be active in the Anticon, very active in the Anticon community, to join and to participate more actively. So stand by on that front. This is just in the beginning stages at the moment, but we will be sending out more information on the mailing list on this group. The last point I wanted to touch on here is communications and outreach. I look around today and I see a whole range of communications, including through social media sites, that, well, for people like me who've been around a long time, probably I'm not using them as effectively as I might be. And we're going to be looking to some of our younger or some of our early career researchers to help us and to tap into the creativity that's out there, and to communicate more effectively, and to disseminate our scientific activities and our scientific findings in a more accessible way, and in a way that reaches a broader cross-section of both the research community but also the general public. So again, our logo competition is a good example of that. We've already had some fantastic entries for the logo competition, and I continue to look forward to ideas that are coming through on that front. So how are we actually going to do these things that we're promising? And before I start talking about this, I'd like to acknowledge that it is an ambitious program, but these programs need to be ambitious. They are, as I said, SCAR's flagship groups. We are, if you like, coordinating much of the research that will be carried forward as SCAR scientific advice, and in that through that lens, we actually need to be quite ambitious. The key activities that we hope to conduct, I've sort of outlined here, and this is in somewhat specific way, but also quite generic, so we can sort of have room to move in terms of what we actually do as time goes on. But of course, holding workshops are going to be a key component as we move forward. Now, these will take the form of both training workshops, but also workshops that can engage a broader section of the community. And for the foreseeable future, these will be virtual. And we're getting better at it. I know that from my own point of view, it can be even more tiring sometimes participating in virtual meetings than traveling and attending them in person. But to be honest, we don't have a lot of choice, at least in the short term. And we are really trying to get better at it. And I think we've got some ideas on that front, and we'll continue to explore ways of engaging better in the virtual space. And so there'll be various workshops. As I mentioned, we hope to facilitate fellowships and training opportunities. We'll be reporting regularly. Our reporting will form our annual reporting will be in the form of a report to SCATS, the Standing Committee on the Antarctic Treaty System, where we actually, I guess, summarise some of the important research that may be of relevance to policymakers, and talk to that committee about the best way to bring that forward into the policy space. We'll be publishing our research wherever possible, because as many of us have seen, good quality peer-reviewed published research can be very effective in the policy space. And we'll also be, as I said, trying to facilitate participation through fellowships in some of these training opportunities, and also in some of these meetings. In terms of next steps, we'd like to finalise the representation of the other SCAR groups on the steering committee, and this will be happening over the next few weeks. So if you're a chief officer of one of these larger groups and you haven't heard from us, you will be soon. And so we're looking for some ex officio representation there. As I mentioned, we would like to set up a program advisory group to broaden the direct engagement with people who would like to be more active in Anticon, and we'll try and finalise some of the workshop ideas and dates, including with the other SRPs. And I think that's probably a good point to finish on, is that we have 3 new SCAR SRPs, Anticon, Instant, and AntClim now. And there's information on all 3 on the SCAR website. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about them, please visit the SCAR website. I think that's about enough from me for the time being. Just a reminder here that if you are interested in staying and learning more about what's going on in Antarctica, please subscribe to one of our several social media sites or register with the mailing list. Thank you very much. What I'll do now is I'll stop sharing. I'll come back to this later as need be. These details are also on the SCAR website, and I'd like to open up for questions and comments. And I see that there's a question here. The logo competition appears to be only open to scientists. I'm a creative outreach person. Can I submit a logo? The only, I guess, limitation that we've put on the logo competition is that we would really like it to be, we would like to provide the opportunity for early career researchers in this competition. And so we have put that people sort of five years out from their PhD are open. Now, I think Marla, you've raised a really good question there about how open we should be, because as you correctly point out, it's usually scientists that have PhDs. I mean, that's what it's about. So I think your question is a good one, and probably just need to take that on notice and have a quick discussion with the steering committee about how we approach that. It's not something that we considered, and I agree we probably should have. So I really appreciate you pointing it out. And if you could just perhaps get in contact with me through the link on the Anticon homepage. If you go to members, there's a link that allows you to contact either myself or Metcha. If you could just get in contact there, so I have your contact details, I'll get back to you with a response. But it's a really good question, and I thank you for raising it, because it's something that we should probably discuss. So much appreciated. Great. Is there anything else that anybody would like to make a comment or to ask a question? Please just put your hand up or put it into the chat. Another really good question here. Is the only way to help out with conservation to have a PhD and do research? That's an excellent question. And look, I don't think it is. Absolutely not. There are people that contribute to conservation efforts through a whole range of activities and mechanisms. What I do need to reiterate, though, is that through SCAR, we are a scientific research program, and so our focus will be on science and research activities. Now, that's not to say that there's not opportunities to collaborate with people who are better at aspects of whether it be communication or outreach or a whole range of other things that we are. So I would say that while scientific research and scientific activities form the foundation of this group, we are absolutely open to suggestions and collaborations with other people on how we might do that better, how we might improve our outcomes. And so this scientific research program is not everything to everybody. They never can be. But what we've tried to do is be as inclusive as possible. And that includes, I think, collaborating with others who may not necessarily be focused on science, but may be focused on the delivery of science or the communication of science or other activities that I'm not even thinking of now. So the short answer is please get in touch with your ideas, and we'd be really happy to chat to you. Now, I see, Metcha, you have your hand up. Could you, I'll pass over to you.
Yes, I will add to what you say, that I agree, is that we also want to get involved with different stakeholders, including NGOs. Sorry, I was thinking in Spanish. Even I can see some people here, so this is another way to think about this contribution and interaction.
Thank you, Metcha. That's an excellent point. Do we have any other questions or comments following the introduction and overview? Just a point there from Kerry Wilson on the chat. There is a new initiative in Australia, a recently funded initiative, Securing Antarctica's Environmental Future. This is an initiative that's been funded for 7 years, and there's many I guess, alignments with some of the objectives of Anticon and the objectives of this new research initiative, which is focused on Antarctic research and also includes a socio-ecological component and a component that looks more broadly than just the natural and physical sciences. So thanks for the reminder, Kerry. It's great to, as I said in one of my slides, it's great to know about these sorts of potential collaborations and synergies, but also to start talking and take advantage of them. So much appreciated. Couple more seconds if anybody's keen to chip. Oh, Susie, very good. Nice to see you. Please take the virtual floor.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to see you too, and everyone else as well. Thanks very much for these presentations, and it's really great to see this all coming together. And I think I really appreciate what you've been, the points you've been making about the route into the Antarctic Treaty System through SCATS. I think that's a function that SCATS has performed under your leadership for a very long time, and before that as well. And I think that will continue to be very important. So I appreciate you mentioning that, and really look forward to working together with Anticon as this develops. And I think it's important to mention as well that I think we as SCATS certainly have a responsibility to feed back in the other direction as well. I think quite often all this fantastic science comes through SCAR into the treaty meeting, into CAMLA, and it's sometimes, I think, difficult for scientists providing that to then see how this stuff is being used and have that feedback. So I think it would be great, and I'll certainly try to do this as much as possible, if we can feed back and communicate with the wider SCAR community, certainly with Anticon, about where this research is going, what the next steps are, and to keep it as a really iterative process and a dialogue as we go forward. So I'm really excited about Anticon moving forward, and I hope that we can keep that that process of it being a two-way interaction with the treaty system going. Thank you.
Thanks, Susie. I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree that it needs to be iterative. And the more we hear from you about some of these emerging priorities, the better, really, because our aspiration is to have impact. But as those of us who have been involved in the policy space very well know, if we're not hitting the priority issues, if we're not addressing the priority issues, there is never enough time in these meetings to cover everything that people think is important. And so prioritization is a necessary part of this process. For us to understand those priorities is really important. And so I thank you for raising it as an issue, and it's absolutely something that we'll be looking forward to facilitating as part of the Anticon program. Thank you. Great. Anything further before we move on to research theme 1? Very happy to keep this rolling if people have got comments or questions at this stage. Just a note there from Charlie in the chat that Antos has a home. Look, Charlie, I think Antos, the Antarctic Nearshore and Terrestrial Observing System, for those of you who aren't familiar with the acronym, has done a great job of starting to build momentum over the last several years. I think this is a really important SCAR initiative, and I think that working together with Anticon will absolutely be important as we move forward, because the monitoring that's planned as part of Antos, getting acronym confusion there. The monitoring that's planned as part of Antos is really consistent with some of the needs and some of the objectives of Anticon. So yes, couldn't agree more that there's heaps of space for collaboration on that front. All right, I'm going to stop talking. If there's no more questions or comments at this stage, I'm going to ask Heather Lynch to take over and to present on research theme 1. Thank you, Heather.
All right, excellent. So this is just a short presentation to give a bit of an advertisement for research theme 1. which I'm leading up with Antonio Casada, and we actually have a vacant opening for the early career representative for Research Theme 1. So if you would fall into that category or know somebody who would, please let us know. So Research Theme 1 is centered around current state and future projections of Antarctic systems, species, and functions. And these are the key questions to be addressed. I won't read them all out, but they center on the current status and future trends of Antarctic species, ecosystems, and environments, with the goal of understanding how they might change over time and which species might be particularly vulnerable. And you can see immediately how that would tie into some of the other anti-con research themes. We're interested in what the key drivers would be of these changes, and also whether there are tipping points or thresholds that we need to be concerned about, particularly if they would represent an irreversible change to the Antarctic ecosystem or environment. So the Antonio and I and our former early career representative Charlene got together and thought about how we would tackle what feels like an almost overwhelmingly large question, which is the current status and future projected change of Antarctic biodiversity. And we thought that we would start this year really focusing on status, the current status of Antarctic biodiversity. So our task right now, as we envision it, is to establish baseline information on the current status of Antarctic biodiversity, and that includes both distribution and abundance. And again, just to reiterate some of Alex's comments from earlier, we are in no way intending to duplicate, nor could we possibly duplicate all of the work that's been done by other groups, be it GBIF or SEUS or other groups that are trying to compile information on current status. Our goal in the first part of this three-pronged approach is to identify those resources. So to make sure that we are aware of all of the biodiversity databases that have been compiled to date, and to identify any gaps therein. So if there are taxonomic gaps, I'll talk about that in another slide. But again, not probably creating new resources, but trying to wrap our brain around what exists and what gaps there might be. The second prong of this approach would be to digitize or distribute unpublished data. So this is really to work with the community, to work with all of you, to try and surface data that might exist within the national programs that are sitting on paper, in a filing cabinet, or on a hard drive that have never been published as part of some other scientific analysis, but would have real value for understanding the current status of Antarctic biodiversity. And the third prong is a long game question, which is how do we incentivize the digitization and or distribution of what would be not just unpublished, but unpublishable data. And that is, we use the word unpublishable here in recognition that not all data are easy to publish in the scientific literature. Journal editors and reviewers very much would like you to be testing hypotheses or addressing fundamental science questions. But basic monitoring data or observations that might not fit inside of a scientific analysis are often considered unpublishable. And we would like to figure out how to work with the journals or work with other online repositories to try to incentivize people to make those data available and to lower the barriers for them to make that data available. So that's our three-pronged approach with which we will start trying to establish a baseline of the current status of Antarctic biodiversity. So we have a number of questions for the community, and the goal of this is really to hear from all of you, not to hear from me. But we want to know if you have unpublished data on the distribution and abundance of any Antarctic taxa. So that's question one. What's available now, and we'd like to work with data holders to either incorporate those data into databases or to publish it or to just otherwise make it available. Second, we'd like to understand what barriers exist to data sharing. If there are data that are not public, why are they not public? How do we make it easier to make those data public? How do we lower the barriers? And then we'd also like to know which taxa do all of you think have the most pressing data gaps? So we've listed some of the taxa that we're considering here, but some of these taxa are better known than others, and can we as a group identify where the gaps are and try and figure out the next steps to meeting or addressing those gaps? Because those are ones that won't necessarily be filled on their own. I think it may take a targeted effort to fill some of these gaps once they are identified. So just to conclude, the next steps are to identify individuals or institutions that would be interested in research theme 1. We anticipate a meeting of interested parties early in the summer. So we would like to hear from you soon if you're interested in being part of that. And we'd like to identify specialists in all of these different taxonomic groups. Nobody is an expert in all of these groups. And a lot of this information about what is known and unknown really resides in the heads of experts. It's hard to find that written down or published, but there are experts out there who would know immediately what data exist and what data simply do not exist on the planet. And we can save ourselves time looking for them. So that's all we have right now, but we really would like to hear from all of you about a priority taxa or data that might be available. And we look forward to marching down what is a very long road with all of you starting this spring. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Heather. That was fantastic. Before we get into an open question and answer, and I'm sure there'll be several on this theme, I'd actually like to give Anton, see if Anton would like to just talk very briefly about the Antarctic Biodiversity Portal, because I think it's worth acknowledging in this discussion as we talk about the acquisition of data and our desire to get more data to feed into our work. I think it's worth acknowledging the work that the Antarctic Biodiversity Portal has done. And Anton, I wonder if you could just very briefly or speak to that, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Heather, for that introduction. I thought I saw a lot of things that I think are very, very interesting. To quickly introduce myself to those that don't know me, I'm Anton van der Putten. I manage the Antarctic Biodiversity Portal, which is an official SCAR product, and it's basically the regional portal for things like GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and OBIS, the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. And these are pretty much two of the biggest biodiversity or occurrence type data repositories that are around. I have a bunch of other hats within SCAR and other things. I'll not go into those at this point. But yeah, I think what you highlight are exactly the issues that are at play. It's trying to mobilize data like abundance data. I think we've managed through the Sense of Antarctic Marine Life, a lot of occurrence data was mobilized, and we really need to make that step to abundance data. What is also clear from the experience since the census, which is 15 years ago, is that we need the scientists to have an interest, to have an active interest in mobilizing that data. A good example was also shown by Alex, the RETIT process, where we work together, again, with a bunch of people that are also in this call, on getting that data put together and answering key questions. And that's the process where you see, I mean, we managed to get 4,000 individual tracks of Antarctic birds and marine mammals together. And that was a big relevant paper, which I think fits very well within the scope. I mean, if it would have started later, this would have been the perfect project for Antarctica. Because it brought data and it did the research, and now we're bringing it to the policy level. So I think it's a great example. Yeah, so I'm loving what I'm hearing. I think having the questions coming from the research, this is the data that we need, and those things, this is really key in bringing this forward. And so what I would say is, so we are a regional node for OBIS and GBIF, and what we do is we try to provide advice to people on how best to publish biodiversity data. We can provide assistance in publishing that data. And we also try to educate people on how to manage data and how to do that in a way which benefits themselves, but also others. So yeah, I would be very keen on working together with you. Alex, thinking about a different hat, should I also say something about Agaby?
Sure, Anton. You feel free briefly to touch on Agaby, because again, that's very relevant to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so another group I think is quite relevant is the expert group on Antarctic biodiversity informatics. So I'm currently the secretary for that, but that's actually run by Ben Raymond. And unfortunately, in the morning session, Ben and I were in another meeting, living the Zoom high life. And with that group Agaby, the focus is more on what we can do with data that exists. So it's really looking at what data is available there and how can we translate that in useful research. A lot of that in that group revolves around using packages like R to analyze that data. And we try to be quite engaged. We just had a call for new members. I think we can still extend that a bit longer if you want. The information for that is in the SCAR use pages. So if you have data that you want to publish, you can get in touch with me for publishing that through the SCAR Antarctic Biodiversity Portal. If you want to work with data and you want to do things with that, please engage with your expert group on Antarctic biodiversity informatics.
Thanks, Anton. That's great. Now, I think Charlie's got his hand up, and then there's a question from Conchita, and another one following that. So I'll go to Charlie first. Hello.
Thanks, Alex and Mika. And Heather, thanks for your presentation. It was very enlightening to see that people are addressing real issues, even if they're really ambitious issues, and highlighting them for the community to focus our efforts toward. So as Anton pointed out, there are already existing mechanisms that may be appropriate for publishing some of the unpublishable data. And then I think another aspect that we collectively as a community needs to address is how we can dig into the legacy data and turn them into useful information. So I would just like to make you aware of the effort that we're currently making as part of the Antarctic Science Platform within New Zealand to try and do that for the terrestrial biology or the terrestrial biogeography of the Ross Sea region. And I'm putting a geographic boundary on this because that's what our mandate is. So the approach we're taking right now is to actually use machine learning, using the capitalizing on the advance made by various journal and data aggregators over the past decade. We can now very easily retrieve the existence of articles going back half a century on the biology, on the existence of terrestrial biology in Antarctica. And so we can, just off the top of my head, if we used some very broad keywords that are relevant for terrestrial biology in Antarctica, such as tardigrade, nematodes, and so on, we can retrieve about 300,000 articles from a Google Scholar. And the vast majority of that is useless, right? Because as you can imagine, if we use very broad keywords, then we're going to get some articles that are not relevant. So we're currently using machine learning to categorize the abstracts based on abstracts to help us narrow down on the articles that are relevant, and we're going to retrieve them automatically. And then we use machine learning algorithms to help us identify the entities of geographic locations and organisms, and then identify the relationship, and this is where natural language processing comes in, to help us identify relationships between biological entities and geographic locations. And then we can then extract that information and put it into a GIS database with nuances around the spatial accuracies of geographic coordinates versus the dead reckoning location provided by somebody back in the 1970s. And so that's a level of nuance that's really tricky sometimes but we have ways of presenting this information statistically. So the overall outcome, I think, is a data product that will address many of the goals that NICON Theme 1 is targeting. And I think we're also deliberately casting a very wide net when we import the articles, because we're not using specific terms for the RASI region. Instead, we're using terms like Antarctica or the Antarctic. And what that means is that the data will be there, and we can very, very, very quickly filter out other geographical regions for people to analyze. And part of the Antarctic Science Platform's mandate is that everything is conducted in accordance with a FAIR principle, which means by default that open access and public availability is going to be a part of it, just a matter of time. And so in the long term, everything will be available. In the short term, please work with us. And I'll stop here because this is a long meeting, and I'm just going to throw in the URL for the Antarctic Science Platform into the chat box so people can follow up on this if they want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? I was just curious if you were only searching the English language articles, or if you had a multi-language search tool.
Well, we rely on the articles having the right keywords in English, and which surprisingly it captures a lot of Roman languages, and as well as East Asian languages. And I think, if I'm being honest, that's probably the only languages that exist in the literature, maybe except the Cyrillic languages like Russian. Those are hard. I mean, we were comfortable excluding those languages because they weren't that active in our region, but of course they are very active in other regions of Antarctica.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. And as we've pointed out on a couple of occasions, it really isn't our intention to reinvent the wheel. And so identifying these sorts of ongoing bodies of work and where we might collaborate is really important. We have a point there that the data are not always complete, Conchita, because we need more taxonomic efforts. And this is something that we have sort of, I guess, struggled with or run into across data compilation across all taxa. And so we absolutely agree, Conchita. And can you talk to that very briefly? I'm going to need to move on shortly, but if you would like to talk to that very briefly.
Yeah, I just would like to add that, yeah, this is a big problem, especially for marine invertebrates. In the list that Heather just showed, you see like seals and penguins and blah, 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 but then all marine invertebrates are only one line. And there are many phyla there. It's many, many thousands of organisms. And we have a big gap because sometimes we have material, but we don't have the time or the money or the taxonomist to identify it. So we cannot provide the data for Anton or whatever else want to look at the data because we don't know the species. Maybe they are not even described. So we need to somehow cover these gaps in order to have a good database, I think. So that was my point, briefly.
Thank you. And briefly, Sam, did you have something else that you wanted to add? Your hand's up.
Is that me?
Yes, your hand was up.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to say, hi, everybody. I'm here representing SOOS, the Southern Ocean Observing System, and we are really excited to see what Anticon is looking to do. SOOS does a lot of things that are relevant in the right sort of neck of the woods and the same sort of playing field as Anticon, but nothing specifically focused on conservation. So it's really great to see that specific focus is being taken up. I think the overlaps or the synergies with SOOS are greatest for theme 1, which Heather, you just presented very nicely. So I think we can make some really meaningful links there. And a specific place I'd recommend you looking, you may well have done already, is that SOOS has a data portal called SOOS Map, which gathers lots of hydrographic and environmental data, so less of the biodiversity conservation focused stuff, but as supporting environmental variables. I think the synergies there could be really nice. And then just whilst I've got the mic with a slightly different hat on, I've also been involved in the MISO project, the Marine Ecosystem Assessment for the Southern Ocean, which lots of you are familiar with. So there is a suite of papers there which will probably also be very helpful in informing you about what is known and what is not. So yeah, just to reiterate, SUS is in full support of this research programme and excited to be here and to hear about more and see it all going forward.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you letting us know, and you make some really good points. Much appreciated. And there's just one more point here about could we elaborate on how such databases will be curated? Look, we're not going to have time to go into that in detail now, but it is a very important question. I think it's something that Anton has spent a lot of time thinking about through the portal, through his development of the portal, and through our broader considerations. But it is something that we will be discussing, and we'll be happy to engage further on ideas around data curation and how that might be best done. But I will move on to the presentation of theme 2. And I think, Andy, you're up to do that at this meeting. So if I could pass on to you, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. I'll just get that sorted. And I'm hoping we're up and running. If nobody can see the screen, just shout out. I am singularly terrible at multitasking, so I'm relying on others to point out in the chat room about any questions until I stop sharing the screen. Well, hi everyone, welcome to theme 2. Focuses primarily on research around the topics of human impacts and the sustainability of our interactions with Southern Ocean ecosystems. Now, Jasmine, Kevin and myself form the leadership group of this theme, but something that Antonio Quesada said to me in this morning's meeting kind of resonated strongly with me, that our job isn't so much to lead the research in this area, it's more to facilitate the broader community, which is you folks, in trying to frame your research along relevant lines that can help us provide a robust scientific backbone to policymaking decisions. Now, you saw the timeline that Alex put on for Anticon, and there is absolutely no chance that I'm going to be able to cover much of what we do in 6 and 7 minutes along that timeline. What I'm going to try and do is give you a brief introduction to the theme and highlight the very last slide, which is the contact details for the 3 of us. So if this starts to feel like a bit of an information overload session, just get in touch with any of us to discuss this theme further. But let's move on. So the situation, our activities in the Southern Ocean, the subantarctic islands and the Antarctic continent itself are increasing. We're fishing, and with the exception of the pandemic over the last couple of years, we're visiting the area more as tourists. Even our research activities and the associated supporting infrastructure are on the rise. And we know this, and the policymakers and the environmental managers are making efforts to minimize these impacts to sustainable levels. But this policy and management levels also made us acutely aware of the role that scientific research and evidence can play in helping them make these decisions better. Enter Anticon, and specifically enter research theme 2. We've got 3 very broad questions that guide what we hope to achieve. Firstly, what are we doing now in the area, and what are we likely to be doing in the future? Secondly, what are those activities going to lead to? And then finally, what can we do about it that has got the best chance of mitigating those activities? After you've formulated those questions, what are the different tool sets that we can bring to bear to answer them? Now, Alex and Metcha both alluded to this in the opening presentation. Theme 2, like the other themes, are not standalone silos. They're not independent research areas that have blinkers on. Because the problems are multifaceted, finding the solutions are going to require interactions between all of the research and synthesis areas. And specifically for theme 2, because we're talking about human impacts, then engagement with those stakeholders like the tourist industry and the rest are going to be equally as important. It kind of makes our job easier in theme 2, actually, because when you contact us to discuss your research and how it might fit within theme 2 in Anticon, we'll very likely also say you need to go and speak to the other research themes and the synthesis team, because what you're doing is going to apply to them as well. Now, we're also acutely aware that human impacts can be cumulative or synergistic, they can be direct or indirect. And the sum impact can often be greater than its individual parts, and it's also likely to vary across different spatial and temporal scales. One of the more obvious examples of this is the different ways climate change is impacting around the continent and the surrounding seas. So where are the most vulnerable regions to human activities with this as a backdrop? What are the levels of science-based support for the various types of management tools that can be employed, whether they're marine protected areas, marine or terrestrial ASPAs or ASMAs? How can we employ those to best effect? Now, you're probably starting to see that 6 or 7 minutes isn't really long enough to cover off on these topics, which is why I'm going to say, just remember the last slide. But getting towards the home straight, first up, a few examples of some of the human activities that have direct impacts on the environment and where management actions can benefit from some good science-based advice. First up here, I've got a slide of fishing. There are several fisheries that operate around Antarctica, often in localized areas, such as the current spatial distribution of the fishery for Antarctic krill. We've got catches that are increasing and becoming more concentrated. So understanding how resource extraction impacts the ecosystem at multiple spatial scales and being able to monitor these impacts in the context of other potentially synergistic effects, such as climate change, ocean acidification, they're going to be key to being able to provide that kind of robust level of scientific advice for managing them. Next up, pollution, both marine and terrestrial. Pretty much every activity that involves humans in the Southern Ocean has the potential to introduce contamination into the ecosystem at one level or another. So what are the short, medium, and long-term effects of exposure to contamination? How does bioaccumulation of contaminants impact the food web? And how can we be more effective at remediation of these contaminants? What about flora and fauna, terrestrial and marine? What are the direct effects of having until recently anyway, a growing tourist industry walking around? And what are the recovery times of processes to these terrestrial fauna and flora assemblages once damage has been done? What are the acoustic impacts on marine fauna of the vessels that move these tourists around? These are the kind of questions in particular that need engagement both from the scientific community here to find evidence-based answers, but also from the stakeholders that are involved in propagating them, such as IATO. Promise we're getting to the proper home straight now. Native and non-native species. So the introduction of non-native species, not only from outside the Antarctic biome, but also from different regions within Antarctica. The shift of climactic envelopes, allowing temperate species to move southwards. What are the introduction vectors into terrestrial and marine ecosystems? And what are the rates at which climate-driven shifts in species distributions are occurring? So, for example, the king crab sticks out in my mind in particular. And very finally, as I mentioned right at the beginning, what I consider to be the most important slide, and no, not because my name's on it before anybody asks, it's because the contact details are there. This has been a very, very quick look at what our goals are for this research theme. And it's, in a nutshell, it's to have a positive and lasting impact on the science-based management of human activities in the Southern Ocean. But this isn't an exhaustive list of the topics that we hope to cover. So I do strongly encourage everyone here to discuss anything of interest with us, to get in touch with us and see how we can help bring your research into an applied framework. So that's all I have for this. And I'll leave it to the maestro, Alex, to dictate whether we can have questions.
Thank you, Andy. Very much appreciated. That was excellent. And just to reiterate that the scope of this theme is of course across the Southern Ocean and the terrestrial biomes here. We are not limiting ourselves to the marine space, but hoping to focus on aspects of both. Now, as I said earlier, we've got plenty of time for questions or comments. So can I invite anybody who's got something to say to either put it into the chat or to raise your hand. Nadine, please. Lovely to see you here, virtually at least.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thanks very much, Andy. Yeah, I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce myself and one of my other colleagues, Rachel Kavanagh, who's also on here. We're both at the British Antarctic Survey, and we help lead the ICE program, Integrating Climate and Ecosystem Dynamics in the Southern Ocean, which is both a SCAR co-sponsored program and an IMBA program. And we've been involved in the planning stages of this Anticon program. So climate ICE focuses on the pelagic realm, so we're really excited about being involved with Anticon and providing our research and input and strengthening those collaborations with Anticon. So I'll put our website in the chat box, and if you've got any questions for us too, do fire away and go and have a look at our website as well.
Thank you, Nadine. I really appreciate you raising that, because ICE is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, when there is significant bodies of work already underway that Anticon does not absolutely need to replicate. And so I really thank you for pointing that out. And I do think that there are some really good potential synergies and collaborations between the two groups moving forward. And I really look forward to working with you and Rachel more broadly over the next several years, hopefully, to build on the work that you've already done and to hopefully extend it into other areas. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely, and well done on all your hard work. It's been a lot of effort to get this far, so well done.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see some conversations in the chat there, sort of continuing the data curation theme, and that's excellent. This is exactly what we're hoping to happen. So please keep those discussions going. Betcha.
I think that Gabriela wants to make a comment.
Ah, very well spotted. Please.
Thank you, Meta. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Alex, and all, after these 2 years of preparing the proposal for Anticon, which is now coming through. So I'm so very happy about it. I wanted to comment on the project I am working on presently, because it has to do with the themes 1 and 2 we have seen so far. It relates the concept of wetlands and wetland protection in Antarctica. As you all know, the Ramsar Convention is an intergovernmental instrument for protection and wise use of wetlands in almost all the world, but it's not, it doesn't apply to Antarctica and to Antarctic wetlands. For many years now, I'm a limnologist and phycologist, freshwater phycologist by formation. I have been working in Punta Cierva, which is the ASPA number 134, located in Antarctic Peninsula, and just kind of recently came to the conclusion that it is a mosaic of wetlands, and that is what explains its unusual biodiversity, which has in turn justified the protection as an ASPA. And I know there are many other wetlands in Antarctica as well. And I wonder, we are presently making a study, a very detailed study from overall high throughput sequencing of microorganisms to satellite imaging to scan the site. I wonder if these same tools and overall this same concept of the wetland functioning could apply to these other areas in Antarctica. I'm thinking about, for instance, there is where Limnopolar Lake is located, and Spain works a lot. Can't remember the name of the place right now, but I think that this is an important gap we have. Just the surveying not only organisms but also ecosystems with the whole ecosystem functioning as well. So I would like to invite all colleagues who are apparently working on wetlands to just get around and exchange ideas on this, because I feel it's very relevant to their conservation. That is,
Thank you. A couple of points in response. Firstly, it's great to hear about such research that is so relevant to informing sort of future conservation and management decision making. So I really appreciate you raising that. I also think it's another point you raised about sharing tools like the one that you're developing and using across different research areas is also something that ANCICON is very keen to facilitate and to coordinate. So thank you for raising those important points, and I think there's definitely scope for bringing more collaborators into your potential mix, and also for sharing the knowledge that you already have. So thank you very much for raising it here.
Thank you.
Sorry, was muted momentarily. We've got a few more minutes for any further questions on theme 2. I see there's some other conversations going on in the chat still relating to theme 1, but I'll leave those for the time being in the interest of keeping things moving along. Any further questions on theme 2? Susan, please.
Good morning, Alex and everyone. It's not really a comment, but more just introducing myself, Susan Bengtson-Nash. I'm the Chief Officer of Impact, which is the input pathways of persistent organic pollutants to Antarctica. And Alex, you and I have had some discussions, but for the broader group, and especially for Andrew and anyone else from the team, from theme 2, just flagging my interest in connecting here on theme 2, particularly for long-range transport of chemicals, as well as the local emissions of emerging contaminants of concern. So very keen to connect there and looking forward to it. Excellent.
Thank you very much, Susan. We appreciate you letting us know and reminding those here of the work that Impact does, which is really important in the space that you just described. So thank you, and looking forward to further collaborations. Sian, please.
Thanks very much. Yeah, great talk, Andy. Really interesting, and nice to see you and your dog on my laptop screen this evening. You mentioned IARTO. I wonder what kind of engagement you've already had with IARTO, or indeed what engagement you are planning to have going forward.
Yeah, hi, John. It's good to see you again, even if it's this big. Yeah, look, SCAR, a year, we had a similar question raised during the morning session, and SCAR a couple of years ago formed a liaison group with the IARTO. I think it was specifically to do with Jasmine's project on systematic conservation planning. So we've had now an open line of communication with IARTO and thus with its members for a few years, but I guess ANTICON and Research Theme 2 have got a great opportunity to really leverage that connection a bit more and start speaking to them about specific activities. I mean, the ones that jump to my head are the issues of acoustic pollution and terrestrial disturbance. So they're just two things that jump into my mind. But that communication line is open and has been open and established for a few years. We've now just got to use it properly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Great. Time for one more. Anybody else got anything they'd like to add or any questions out there? Please just pipe up if I'm not seeing you. I've got a little bit going on my screen at the moment. Great. All right then. Thank you again, Andy, and for those that participated in that discussion. Very helpful and very informative. Next up, I'd like to invite Daniela Liggett to talk about theme 3. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you, Alex and Matcha and everyone. It's nice to see so many of you here. Let me just bring up the presentation. There we go. And Steve and I will actually share that presentation, just following up from you, Alex, and Matcha sharing so beautifully, just to ensure that you can get to meet both of us here. So we'll be spending a few minutes talking about research theme 3, which deals with the socio-ecological approaches to Antarctic and Southern Ocean conservation, and is a very exciting addition to any conservation-focused ecological research programs, because it considers humans and human activities more than we have previously done, and it acknowledges that we cannot really separate what humans do in the Antarctic from ecological changes anymore, and need to consider them in tandem. This research theme is being co-led by Adrian Hawkins, who gave the morning presentation, and Steve Chignall and myself. And we'll provide you some contact details later on. And as I said, Steve and I will share this presentation. The research questions for us to consider very much take socio-ecological systems in the Antarctic to another level, where we consider the connectivity between human activities and within those ecological systems, as well as the consequences of those activities and their impacts. But we also have to think about, well, what do responsible governance and ethical governance for Antarctica actually look like if we do want to emphasize and take a conservation lens on Antarctica? We need to think beyond ecological systems and even beyond human actors. We need to also think about the rights of other species. We also need to ponder questions around resilience of this conjoined socio-ecological system that we need to take into consideration. And obviously the last year has painfully reminded us all that rapid disruptions in the global order, be it because of societal, political, or economic shifts, or pandemics, as I mean, we're all still feeling the impacts now and will so for the near future to come. What impact do they have on Antarctic activities? And it is actually quite prescient that we had a question like that in the Antarctic proposal before COVID, but we do need to be aware that disruptions like those will happen again, and we have to make sure that we can consider them adequately in our research and also in our interactions with stakeholders and any proposals that we might make to bodies such as the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting on the CP through SCATS. So essentially research theme 3 is tasked to look at the linkages between the science around, for instance, ecosystem dynamics, policy and management practices, and human behaviors within the system and beyond as well, because as we know, we are dealing with a globally connected system. And we should also think about socioeconomic and cultural values, as well as understand those less tangible values, such as aesthetic and wilderness values that have been articulated in the protocol on environmental protection and that need to be taken into consideration if we want to adopt a more comprehensive approach to conservation in the Antarctic. So our initial thinking really tried to establish what kind of framing we want to put on our work and research theme 3, because as you know, the questions that we've been tasked to address are a relatively diverse set that really draw on a range of social sciences and ecological research in an integrated and transdisciplinary fashion. A while ago, in 2012, a paper was put forward to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting that explored the Antarctic Conservation Biogeographic Regions approach that had a while ago been proposed by Alex themselves, and quite a few other people were involved in the initial identification of those Antarctic conservation biogeographic regions, which you see here on the figure and which have been updated in a more recent publication by Alex and Jasmine Lee in 2016. And we thought of expanding those and taking into consideration human activities as well as management activities and cultures and values by thinking a bit more about biocultural regions. And this is where Steve actually will jump in and take over. And I can advance the slides for you if it's easier, Steve, if you just want to speak.
Thanks, Daniela. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so the idea with this is essentially kind of tapping into some emerging ideas, and especially some of the environmental anthropology and conservation literatures that are trying to look at the overlap of biodiversity and human and linguistic and cultural diversity, and finding that across the world, the two are actually very spatially overlap with each other. And thinking about what that means in terms of our conceptions of these places, but also what our ethical obligations are to them. So this has kind of spawned off a whole number of subfields of biocultural research. So biocultural conservation, biocultural ethics, some of which is already being done by people like Riccardo Rossi in the sub-Antarctic region. And so trying to think about how maybe these might apply as well to the rest of Antarctica in terms of how scientists themselves think about and value and interact with the landscape. And so the next slide, yeah, thanks. One way of approaching this that we've been kind of excited about and proposing is through the field of critical physical geography, which is a new field in the last few years, which basically tries to remedy the classic divide between the natural and biophysical scientists and the social scientists, and says, hey, you know, if we accept the sort of central premise of the idea of the Anthropocene, that the world that surrounds us is now a sort of socio-ecological hybrid, then our research has to be as well. And so it no longer makes sense to concentrate natural science research on pristine systems or to separate research on the environment and the natural sciences and social sciences. And so we thought this fit really well with the remit of Anti-Econ and kind of sitting between the pure physical and pure human geography. And it's a really interesting field. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend checking it out. But they are really all about sort of constructive, and by critical, they really mean constructive critically. So they don't want to just criticize. They realize we're at a point now where we need to, you know, move beyond just criticizing scientists or criticizing, you know, whatever either side, or subsuming the other side into our analyses, and try to have a symmetrical approach that emphasizes sort of mixed methods. And finally, like the reflexive practice in terms of thinking about our own values and our own perspectives that we're bringing to our research. And so, yeah, I mean, if you guys want to get involved, please contact any of us, and I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts. These are all preliminary ideas, of course, but yeah, we're excited about it.
Thank you, Steve. And I just want to echo Steve's thoughts there. Get involved and share your ideas with us. Obviously, none of what we've proposed is the only way forward here. And we appreciate a diversity of opinions and viewpoints and also research input. So if you've got other thoughts, or you think we've overlooked something, or you work on certain areas of what we've touched on that you'd like to share and connect with us, please let us know. And back over to you, Alex and Matja.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It was fantastic. A really nice overview of the theme and some of the emerging ideas that you've got to pursue in the near future. Thank you very much. I think it's worth reiterating now, and I'll come back to it at the end before in my wrap up. But what we're trying to do here in these theme presentations is, in particular, is to give you a flavour, is to give you some seed ideas about what we're thinking. This is not at this stage the be all and end all of Anticon, and we are very receptive to other ideas, and even if they're quite separate to what we've discussed today, if they potentially have contributions to Antarctic conservation and management, and they can inform decision making, then we're very interested to hear about them. But I will come back to that in my wrap up. And first up, I think we've got Charlie.
Thanks, Alex. I don't want to keep monopolizing the time, but I see that Gabriella has already raised a similar point about cultural regions, which are very relevant to indigenous cultures, but which are slightly more problematic with Antarctica, because that's all, well, by default, it's all tied into colonialism. I just want to make everybody aware that I want to first ask Steve, do you have a more I would say a complete description of what we mean by biocultural regions?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a concept that's fairly in development, even among the biocultural research. So one way it's been applied so far, and I saw the comment just now, is looking at it kind of emerged from indigenous like cultural values, and basically people noticing that, hey, biodiversity around the world overlaps with linguistic and cultural diversity, and so actually we can actually map that and see that spatial overlay, and thinking about what that means for management or conservation. But that's now been kind of expanded beyond just indigenous societies, and to say, hey, look, we all are in cultures, and we all have values and specific perspectives, and that also dictates in some ways how we interact with the environment. And so there is potentially a diversity of landscapes that are produced through those different types of interactions, or hybrid landscapes that are produced. And so I personally haven't figured out how to do this yet, but there's quite a lot of examples of this work, and especially I would recommend looking at Riccardo Rossi, who's maybe the one example I could find from anything related to Southern Ocean or Antarctic work. He's in Chile, but he's a big proponent. He's actually a philosopher and an ecologist. And so he thinks about what our biocultural ethics might look like in terms of conservation. So yeah, sorry I hope that helps. Maybe that confuses more than it helps, but.
No, I think I do understand what you mean. And I just put a link in the chat for people to have a look at what some people, a lot of people have been working on biocultural labels from an indigenous perspective. And I think we need to be very careful about recycling that label, because we're talking about indigenous versus colonialism. And so we, just that awareness has to be there. And I think that, now having said that, I think a lot of the work that has gone into biocultural label within the Indigenous context are mechanistically helpful, right? And I think, but we do need to manage the optics of us recycling or even taking over concepts that are being applied to Indigenous knowledge and data.
Some great points, Charlie, and I'll pass on to you, Daniela. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Charlie and also Gabriella for those comments, because we were actually battling with this concept of biocultural of a biocultural approach for these and other reasons, also for political reasons, because obviously it is not necessarily understood and accepted by everyone that we have, or that humans bring culture to Antarctica and culture the space in a broader sense. That's why we did want to have this discussion with you as well and get everyone's input on whether something like socio-biogeographic regions would be more appropriate. Obviously, we realize that this is not a term that is being widely used, and it sounds a bit more contrived. Biocultural framing is being used much more often, but we do have to be mindful of this potential conflation with the Indigenous meaning. So that's really, really good that you raise it and that others raise it. We are aware of it. We just wanted to get people's input on it, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you, Charlie. And I know that we are on the tip of a very rich and complex discussion here that we probably haven't got time to explore in much more detail at this meeting. But I think it's great that we're sort of generating these sorts of discussions and this sort of interest, and I can see that they are going to continue on after this meeting. So unless we've got any pressing questions right at this point in time, Betcha, please go ahead.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. I know that, but I don't want to leave this. I think it's great that we have this human dimension in conservation, because it's something that maybe was not tackled before with this vision, and I think it's something that we really need to take into account. That's the only thing. I really wanted to say this.
No, thank you, Metro. I think it's fantastic to reiterate the importance of this work, and really for me, being involved, seeing the value of this sort of integration that we're talking about now. It's really exciting, and it's not something that I've done before, but I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more. So thank you. And with that, I will pass on to our last presentation for this meeting. Hyung Shul, if you could please start your presentation on the synthetic theme.
All right. So the last one is about synthesis. I'm a little wary of the time left, and this one was put together by Neil Gilbert from New Zealand and myself and Natasha Gardner from University of Canterbury. And the backgrounds to start with, to advise and provide guidance in terms of science and information has been at the core of the SCAR's role, and it's very well stipulated in the Prague Declaration on the occasion of 60th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty a couple of years back. And in fact, this year is a good year to start Anticon, as this year is the 60th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty's entry into force. Okay, for the sake of saving time, the guiding questions, there is a little bit of logical flow. The first one is, how can science address Antarctic conservation goals, and how do we explore and identify scientific outputs that can be integrated to inform decision making? And then to evaluate decision making frameworks and management strategies, how do we use science? And then the inevitable biases, uncertainties, how do we deal with them, and how do we communicate those? And then how do we provide, develop, promote science literacy among policy community, and how do we foster policy literacy for the scientific communities? And then how can we target our science to be better picked up and actually used by decision makers? Those are the great guiding questions. And the opportunities we have, develop collaborations with knowledge sources and key stakeholders via workshops, presentation, and working streams. And then also develop specialist expertise on communication and picking up and actually using best practices. This should be done in collaboration with, for example, human and like a standing committee has. And then also communicate our policy needs to not just within Anticon, but all across SCAR. And how do you provide good reason and tempt people to undertake policy relevant research, especially with the early career in mind. And then these are the things we are planning to do. Maybe the first thing, the urgent thing, is to map out the policy and management needs. Maybe we can do this by having a fresh look at the planning documentations in the Antarctic treaty system, like multi-year plans of CAMLR, CEP, and Antarctic treaty, and so on. And then develop a strategic engagement plan, also build a communication loop and partnership among the stakeholders. This is not just national programs, but NGOs and other relevant organizations. And close collaboration with SCATs as a matter of course, and also other SCAR groups and other SCAR SLPs. And the policy and management needs, not just the current, but we are also looking to the future. So doing a horizon scanning is also part of our next steps we are envisioning. Now, this is a very well done diagram by Jasmine Lee, and it clearly shows what the focus of our synthesis theme is about. It's just self-explanatory. And this is not an endorsement of individual scientific accomplishments, but it's just a showcase of the scientific outputs that are already available in a range of fields, ecosystem integration or alien species and all kinds of related stuffs. So, but it will be important to use these scientific outputs in the right way and in the right time. This is just an example. And the final one. So what I would like to add on to this is we are seeking to recruit people who can advise and also who can provide inputs and also encouragement. I think I will stop there.
Thank you, Hyung-Chul. That was fantastic. And just to reiterate, we're trying something new with this synthetic theme in many ways. We actually want to try and dedicate a resource within Anticon to work on the integration and the synthesis of outputs and bring researchers together to more effectively communicate what we think is important to policymakers and respond more effectively to what they think is important. And I think this synthesis theme has got a really important role to play, not just within Anticon, as Hyung-Chul pointed out, but also, as he mentioned, more broadly across the other scientific research programs and also other SCAR groups. I think really we are trying to develop here within this scientific research program that could assist in the presentation of science into policy in a much more effective manner. So thank you for your presentation, and please, are there any comments or questions from the virtual floor? I'd be really pleased to receive them. Sophia has asked an excellent question on, are there any examples of effective science to policy mechanisms in other global frameworks that ANTICON can look to for best practice or lessons learned? And I think this is a really good point, Sophia. Thank you. I think we've seen, or we're aware of a number of initiatives and mechanisms that are available around the world, and there's no doubt that some are more effective than others. And I think we absolutely should be looking further afield to try and gauge some of this success. And perhaps this is something that Hyung-Chul and Neil and Natasha could think a little bit more about as things start to develop, and if you like, do a little bit of I suppose some sort of audit or some sort of a review of the more effective mechanisms. I think this is probably quite a big job, and so I wouldn't like to commit the team to do anything necessarily at this stage, but I do think it's an excellent idea, and I do think it's worthwhile, in the interests again of not trying to start something brand new that's already been done effectively elsewhere. So thank you very much for your point. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add on that point or anything else? Mecha, please.
Yes, just quickly, I want to add that I think it's great to look for other initiatives, but also that we have to bear in mind that we are under the Antarctic Treaty System, and we need to think about that also. So we have some particular characteristic that we need to take that into account. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. You make a very valid point, and there are complexities with the way that we utilize other mechanisms within the Antarctic Treaty System, because it is such a comprehensive management mechanism. There is nothing like the Antarctic Treaty System elsewhere in the world, and it's very important that we utilize that system rather than trying necessarily to reinvent things. So it's a balancing act, and I think your point is very well made, Mecha. So thank you very much. And I see that Birgit has her hand up. Birgit, welcome to our meeting. Lovely to see you here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
You can, thank you.
Perfect. Well, I thank you for saying that. I joined this meeting this evening in my capacity as leader of the Antarctic program at the Norwegian Polar Institute, but actually I'm putting up my hand with the hat of the chairmanship of the Committee for Environmental Protection, because this is very exciting, I have to say, to have listened to both the last theme, but also the whole scope of the meeting so far. And speaking of mechanisms, I think just this communication here is part of that. So to me, I just really wanted to make a comment that is, as a chair of the Committee for Environmental Protection, it is a very, very beautiful, if I can use that word, to hear this full-scale research program that actually has the committee, the treaty system, the policymakers as the endpoint, if I can say it that way, and caters to the needs, answers to the questions, or trying to answer to the questions that we are constantly asking. When we have discussions, we most often pop up and say, well, we need more knowledge about this. And here is actually a group that is focusing on that. And I think the mechanism of having this dedicated research program, using the system of SCAR and SCATs, moving information into the committee, which brings it upwards also to the policymakers, is a wonderful mechanism. And I think it's probably going to be a very well and looked to mechanism as well. So I think I just wanted to take the word and say this is very, very nice and very, very it's going to be very, very useful for yeah, the whole treaty system to get this information that is catering to the needs. And also as a comment, I don't remember who said it now, but of course the committee has a number of tools that might be helpful in feeding back to Anti-ICON and other similar initiatives like the 5-year work plan, it was mentioned. Also our list of science needs, information needs, knowledge needs. So if we can continue to have that sort of back and forth communication, I think this is an excellent process that we're moving into here. And I wish you all the luck with that hat on my head. And I look forward to be contributing with the other hat on. Thank you.
Birgit, it's really nice to hear from you on this. Thank you for your comments. They're very much appreciated. And we absolutely look forward in the future to working with you and others in the CEP further and you know, helping to engage in this iterative process through SCATs and others. So very much appreciated, and thank you for attending this morning. Natasha, I see you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, thank you, Hyung-Chul. That was great. And just picking back up on that comment from Sophia, of course, it will be really important for our theme to look to other contexts. But when it comes to science policy mechanisms, there's not really one panacea for how well they work. And like Mitcha said, we're functioning in a very unique system. So I think our theme will be quite experimental in that way. Yeah, so just thought I'd add that, but thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, we've got a few more minutes before I start my wrap up. Anybody else got any comments or questions on the synthetic theme? Alvaro, please, lovely to see you. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everybody. At least it's evening over here. I was just thinking on Birgit's comment on policymakers being somehow the end point of this process. And I was thinking that they are also the starting point of this. I mean, this is a tool that is devised to make information available to help them take the decisions. So we also need the help from people involved in policy making to spread the voice about the availability of this tool and that Anti-ICON is, and so we can really contribute to those policy making processes by providing them the best possible information that they can get for taking decisions. So just small comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro. Your points are very well made, and I think we've come to some very common agreement here about the importance of this being an iterative process and focusing our efforts on relevant issues. Andy, did you have something you wanted to add on to this?
No, you just took the words out of my mouth, Alex. I was just going to echo exactly what Alvaro said, that even at the early stages of the Anti-ICON spin-off process, it was a very clear positive that this had to be a two-way and iterative process between policy and science. We can't prescribe to policy what they should have, but similarly, they must be able to frame their questions in the way that we can understand and answer. And the only way we can do that is by bouncing backwards and forwards. So yeah, that was all.
Excellent point. Thank you. We've got time for one more before I move on to my wrap up. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to reasonably quickly say or ask a question?
I feel like we keep being given rich and heavy food for thought already.
That is the intention of the meeting. Absolutely, Hyung-Chul. You're right. We've just touched the tip of some very rich and interesting and often quite complex discussions in this meeting, and I couldn't have asked for more on that front. So firstly, can I just thank you all once again for your attendance? Can I thank the presenters? It's been really helpful for me. As somebody who's been involved in this initiative for some time now and been thinking about this sort of work for my whole working life, it's great that I can come to these sorts of meetings and still be inspired by the things that I'm seeing and the ideas that I'm hearing. So thank you very much to the presenters and the participants for your active engagement today. We've put a few contacts up on the chat throughout the meeting, and I just think it's worth worth remembering that the steering committee and indeed the administration of these groups is done on a voluntary basis, and we do try our very best to get back to you in a timely manner, but invariably we also have day jobs that we're trying to juggle in amongst this organisational work, and hopefully a lot of the time the two coincide quite well, but sometimes there's times where we can't spend quite as much on the Anticon business as we would like, and so there may be delays, and please just bear with us. As a group, we will try and respond to your queries and your questions and your ideas as soon as possible, but we are all sort of volunteering on this front, and sometimes these things do take a little longer than we would like. So just wanted to mention that as well. I'll get back to some of the chats that are coming through in a moment. I just had a couple of points here. The other point is that I'm very aware that these meetings unfortunately overlapped with the APEX online conference that's been happening, and that was not a great clash, and for that I can partly take responsibility, but there was a limited opportunity, shall we say. What we will do though, and please pass this on to any people in the early or mid-career stages, is that we will hold another one of these dedicated meeting for APEX across a very similar sort of format. And so while a number of people may have missed out, I'd like to sort of just make sure that people are aware that we will be doing this again for APEX. Also, I just wanted to reiterate that what we've seen today is really just a flavour. It's not the be-all and end-all of what Anticon is about. And this is important because we need to have a dynamic sort of approach to this in many ways. As I indicated at the start of this talk, structure is important at some level, but also so is being agile and dynamic. And we are going to try and find that balance throughout the life of Anticon. And that's largely, as we've all discussed, to respond effectively to the emerging needs of conservation and management and policy decisions around the conservation and management in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. One other thing I'd like to, in terms of what's happening in the future, so there will be follow-up meetings, and we'll provide some, and some of those will be quite targeted at specific themes, and we'll provide information on that through the mailing list and through our social media links. But something that we do want to try and organise is in essence an online database whereby people can sign up to Anticon. They can put their name, their affiliation and their research interest, and whatever they're happy making public about that. And that database will then live in a repository in SCAR and will be available to the Anticon community to see and to potentially help to identify some of the collaborations and the development of some of the networks that we've been talking about at length here. So look, again, between that mechanism and the program advisory group, I'm really hoping that we can continue to engage with a broad section of the community. And I think that even though it can be hard to fit it all in, I'm very enthusiastic about this. And it's been great to see enthusiasm across the board here, both at this meeting and the one before. The reason that I'm enthusiastic is that the potential of these scientific research programs to have impact, especially one like Anticon that is targeted at research to inform decision-making around conservation and management outcomes in Antarctica and improving those conservation and management outcomes. The impact can be huge. We can really make a difference with the research that we're doing. And if we can come together and if we can form something that's bigger than the sum of our parts, then we can hopefully continue to do that for many years and to see Antarctica and the Southern Ocean and the environments therein maintained and continue for many, many years to come. I'm going to finish there. If anybody else has got a final comment that they'd like to make, please, we have a couple of minutes, but if not, please subscribe to the social media and register in the mailing list, and we'll keep you posted. Nadine, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I think I just want to reiterate your sentiments there. As we've experienced with the ICE program, and I'm sure lots of you here who are involved in various international or regional programs know that a lot of the time it's our own spare time that is put into this program. We have our other day jobs. So, and the success of programs like this really depend on engagement from everybody and a spreading of the word. So yeah, I encourage everybody to become as engaged as you possibly can and spread the word to help really bolster Anticon and its success.
Excellent, thank you. Matthew, did you have anything you wanted to finish up on before we call it a day on this?
I think your words were beautiful, so I will not add anything, but thank you very much. I feel in vigor or something like that. I really like this meeting. Thank you very much.
Excellent. All right. At that point, I think I will thank you all once again. Thank our presenters and say goodbye. These meetings will be recorded and made available in due course. But thank you again, and look forward to further discussions in the not too distant future. Goodbye, everybody.